Europe has made a final decision regarding the frozen Russian assets totaling nearly $300 billion. They will still be transferred to Ukraine in the form of a specific loan. The leadership of the European Union is increasingly convinced that the only reliable way to provide long-term financial support to Ukraine is to implement the European Commission's plan to use the frozen Russian reserves. Because Kyiv may need more than $200 billion for defense and budget financing by the end of this decade if the war continues. Britain and Canada have also announced they are transferring nearly $50 billion in frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. And now, in this video, we will talk in more detail about how Europe has decided to handle the frozen Russian assets in favor of Ukraine. In this episode, my name is Alexei Pichi. Today is October 15th, according to the calendar. And before we start this episode, I want to ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, give it a like, and please write a detailed comment under this episode. This really helps promote the video on YouTube. I urge you to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link is in the description of this video. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel financially, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. It says there, support the channel Alexei Pichi. Then choose any support option that is convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you give to the work of this YouTube channel. So, Bloomberg reports that Kyiv may receive an additional more than $50 billion by using the frozen reserves of the Bank of Russia held by Western countries. The United Kingdom and Canada are joining the European Union, which is finalizing a plan to allocate 140 billion euros to support Ukraine. European countries, let me remind you, are close to reaching an agreement to provide Ukraine with a reparations loan through a mechanism that will allow them to avoid directly seizing Russian assets. And right now, the European Union is discussing this mechanism because it is an important step in ensuring the financial security of Europe itself. Some in Europe fear this could damage their reputation. Supposedly someone's money deposited for safekeeping in Europe could be seized and so on. And with the funds received, Kyiv will be able to purchase weapons, including from the United States, but the main source of arms supplies, European Union countries, intend to make their own military-industrial complex. With this money, in addition, this money can be used to support the Ukrainian economy. It's telling that in Europe they're not discussing whether they should, they're already discussing how. How can they do it to reduce risks for themselves? According to March data from the United Kingdom Foreign Office, more than £25 billion of Russian assets are frozen in the country. That's $33.5 billion at the current exchange rate. So, according to the Bank of Russia, at the beginning of 2022, when Western countries decided to seize its reserves in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it held $37 billion in British pounds sterling and $19 billion in Canadian dollars. What portion of these funds will be transferred to Ukraine is still under discussion. The European Union will not transfer all the Russian reserves it holds. Their total amount is about 200 billion euros, which is $232 billion at the current exchange rate. Of this, about 185 billion euros are held in the Euroclear depository. In turn, about 170 billion euros of this amount are currently cash, which resulted from the redemption of European government bonds in which this money was invested. European Union, put simply, this is money available for immediate use. Now the European Union plans to send 140 billion euros or $162 billion to Ukraine. They will include the partially paid funds from the 45 billion euros that the G7 countries previously decided to give Ukraine, secured by future income from investing Russian reserves. Out of this amount, in that 45 billion, 18 billion euros were allocated to the European Union. Canada, the United Kingdom, and Japan contributed 9 billion euros. The United States was expected to provide the remaining 18 billion euros in Russia. And Belgium is now insisting on reaching an agreement with other European Union countries in case Russia makes claims to these assets in the future. This remains the main obstacle in the negotiations for now. The European Union as a whole or a group of countries has already agreed to provide Belgium's Euroclear with guarantees that they will be able to satisfy potential Russian claims if they arise as a result of legal proceedings. And Russians are such rotten people who shout that the West is bad, everything is bad in the West, and so on and so on. But they spit on international law. But as soon as it concerns them, they run to these same Western courts, to Western jurisdictions, and try to get some rights there. Although, if you violate the rights of others, then just sit quietly and don't complain. It is assumed these guarantees will replace the funds from the Russian account in Euroclear, allowing legal avoidance of directly confiscating these reserves. The assets can only be returned to Russia if it agrees to pay reparations to Ukraine for its invasion. The European Union has already made this excellent decision. In addition, as stated in the European Union, the leadership of the European Union is increasingly convinced that the only reliable way to provide long-term financial support to Ukraine is to implement the European Commission's plan to use the frozen Russian reserves. Because Kyiv will need about $200 billion over the next 5 years, both for budget financing and also for military assistance. Approximately the same amount in euros is held in the Bank of Russia's account at the Euroclear depository, in the form of funds that remained after the redemption of European government bonds owned by Russia. Once again, the authorities of Belgium, where Euroclear is located, remain the main obstacle to reaching a fundamental agreement on the use of these funds. But the European Union countries are trying to reach a political agreement. And next week, essentially, there will be a final meeting where the decision will be announced. Belgium is afraid that if they give this money now, then Russia will come and start trying to get it back through the courts. And let's say Russia wins the case. And Belgium would have to repay this amount? No, Belgium says, listen, give us guarantees from all the other European countries that if something happens, we'll handle it together. And the European Commission says, fine, we'll handle it together. Basically, everyone will contribute a certain amount to insure themselves. And if all this works out, then the European Commission will quickly start the legal process of transferring the assets to Ukraine, so that the first funds can be allocated as early as the second quarter of next year. Kyiv will get around 140 billion euros in new funding, in addition to the 45 billion euros that the G7 countries have already partially transferred to Ukraine, secured by future income from investing Russian assets. Here, well, let me repeat once again, just to make it clear what's actually happening. The money taken from the account in Euroclear, in the Belgian Euroclear, is supposed to be replaced by obligations from European Union countries to repay this debt. But this will only have to be done if Russia starts paying reparations to Ukraine for the war it started on our territory and for the destruction it caused. If Russia refuses to pay reparations, then no one will return the money at all. As you know, the matter is closed. Well, and last week, let me remind you, the European Union stated that it wants to involve other G7 countries in the operation, where Russian money is also frozen. After last week's conversation with the leaders of Germany and France, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that he is ready to do this. Now Canada has also announced that it is joining this program. The issue will be discussed at the G7 finance ministers meeting later this week. The European Union, United Kingdom and Canada are all prepared to transfer frozen Russian assets to Ukraine under the discussed scheme. In total, the G7 countries have frozen about $300 billion of the Bank of Russia's assets, and the European Union will eventually use this money to help Ukraine. And as some experts say, the war has been going on for so long that Europeans may objectively be running out of money in some areas. Well, since Trump withdrew from financing support for Ukraine, the Europeans are now the main sponsors of our country. Well, we need to speak objectively. And the situation arises that either British, French, German, Polish and so on taxpayers will pay for aid to Ukraine, or Russia will pay with Russian assets. That's why it's much easier to explain to the people of Germany, France, the United Kingdom and so on that Putin will pay. Even if this carries reputational risks for the European Union, Europeans will understand this. I'll leave it at that. As usual, share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.